You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 40, The Return of Roy Carter. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Earl Green.
And I'm Ashley Thomas.
Each week on Gene-ology, we go running up that hill to examine early scripts and shows from Gene Roddenberry's TV writing career, digging for signs of buried morals, messages, and meanings of the kind that were common in his most famous work, Star Trek.
Earl will be back with trivia in a moment, but first, here's how you can reach us. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X and Facebook at missionlogpod. While you're at it, leave us a review and rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. And now, this week's trivia.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Everyone brace yourselves. Here comes a real snowball fight of trivia. That's like one thing that didn't happen in this episode, and I can't tell you why not.
They're probably trying not to die.
That again?
I know. It got in the way of a good snowball fight.
We're closing in on the end of Season 2 of Have Gun Will Travel, and this is Gene's final script for that season. This episode aired on May 2nd, 1959, and this is a very rare specimen indeed. Follow-ups and direct sequels to earlier episodes were not really a thing in most 50s television. Now, we are accustomed now to tightly serialized, concentrated seasons in the streaming age, but up until the 90s, the studios producing most broadcast TV series always had one eye on foreign sales and domestic syndication. Foreign sales, of course, meant selling American shows abroad, while domestic syndication repackaged successful shows, usually only after they had topped 100 episodes, as packages of daily reruns that could be bought by one individual station in each television market. In both cases, these repeats were distributed on film and played back via a piece of common TV station equipment called the film chain, which would basically do what's called telecine conversion on the fly, where a small video camera would transmit the live image of the film being played back at a shutter speed that matched the frame rate of the video camera rather than the film camera that shot it. And so often you'd have a show that kind of played back a little bit faster than it originally played out. In mid-1959, we're at the dawn of the era of satellite communications. The first active communications relay satellite launched by the U.S. had been launched in December 1958 by ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Department of Defense, and it showed some promise, but its service lifetime was 8 hours, limited by the life of the battery that it carried on board. TV signals via satellite only became a thing in the 1960s, so mailing film cans across the country, and indeed around the world, was how TV shows were distributed. And to keep costs down, stations instituted a system called bicycling, where one station would show one batch of shows and then mail that week's worth of shows to the next station on the list. They, in turn, would be mailed a batch of shows from the previous station on the list, and so the bicycle wheel kept the rerun world turning. All of this assumed that the film was properly packed by employees of small-market TV stations and survived the tender care of the postal system or international shipping. In short, between all of these factors, there was absolutely no way to ensure that all stations would have the same episodes to show in the same order at the same time. With this in mind, sequelizing previous stories was actively discouraged unless the new story was a very strong contender in its own right and explained everything to anyone who missed the story that started it all. Where the American TV market was concerned, it took lower satellite distribution costs and creatives and studio execs with some serious backbone to break the mold at the end of the 20th century. It can be argued that Babylon 5 stuck its foot in the door, Buffy kicked the door open, and then a few years later, Desperate Housewives and Lost walked through the now open door like they owned the place. But in the late 50s, sequels to earlier episodes are very rare indeed. And the audience was expected to have forgotten nearly everything about the original story, so let's meet the new cast. Taking over from Scott Marlowe in the role of Roy Carter is none other than Clu Gulager, an actor with a storied history in the Western genre alone. Clu would later become a big name in movies such as Return of the Living Dead, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and The Last Picture Show. But for Gene-ology purposes, we last saw Clu as an Army cadet on West Point in Gene's episode The Drowning of the Gun, back in episode 24 of this podcast. Chaplain Robert April has also been recast in the form of actor Larry J. Blake, whose resume includes a number of usually small parts in a great many movies and TV shows from the 30s through 1979's Time After Time, directed by none other than Nicholas Meyer of Star Trek II fame. We've got one future Star Trek guest star here, Brad Weston, who played Eddie Clinton, our man on the run, would go on to guest star in the first season episode Devil in the Dark. Again, kind of appropriate for a story following up on the hanging of Roy Carter. Have Gun Will Travel again ended its season in June, and 11 weeks of the off-season were taken up with reruns, some of them from the first season. Of those 11 weeks of reruns, 3 of Gene's episodes were included. From Season 1, Helen of Abijanian was repeated again by CBS on August 8, 1959, and from Season 2, The Hanging of Roy Carter reran August 29th, and The Road to Wickenburg on September 5th. Season 3 premiered on CBS on the 12th of September 1959, and Gene would have a brand new writing credit only 2 weeks into the new season, kicking off another solid stint of several weeks of Gene scripts for Paladin. Act 1. It's Paladin of the North. Paladin rides up to a house in a snowy landscape, dismounts his horse, and walks up to a man chopping wood outside. Paladin introduces himself, and the man says, "Yeah, Roy's inside." In fact, Roy Carter often talks about how Paladin saved his life. But Paladin says the real hero of that story was the prison chaplain, Robert April. Paladin is told that Roy is entertaining a guest in the front room of the house. If that's what you call it, Paladin goes inside and finds Roy Carter with a lady friend. Roy introduces her to Paladin and again repeats the story of how Paladin saved his life. Paladin repeats his belief that the credit should be given to Robert April. And it's April who brought Paladin here, fresh off of another job, especially since Carter sent a note to Paladin that April is in danger. Oh, yeah, that. Roy explains that a convict working in April's prison library staged a jailbreak and escaped into the mountains north of here. April went after him, as did the prison warden, but when a blizzard hit, the warden withdrew his search party, but April stayed, trying to find the escaped convict. Roy is willing to pay Paladin to find the chaplain. Paladin completely fails to hide the disapproval on his face. Robert April's been stranded in hostile terrain with heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures for 8 days and 8 nights, and Roy Carter, a man whose life April once saved, is entertaining a lady friend? Roy Carter just doesn't get it. He hands Paladin $1,000, his usual fee, but Paladin punches Roy and throws his money back to him. For Paladin, it's not about the money, it's about why Roy isn't doing the right thing and repaying a debt to the man to whom he owes his life. The two set out on horseback, and when they come to a stop to get their bearings, Roy's already cataloging the reasons it's a hopeless search. Paladin doesn't disagree, but he does say that he has more respect for Robert April than any man he's ever met, so the search will continue. On foot, since the terrain is becoming too steep for the horses. Keep climbing. As they continue climbing, Paladin notes that the snow is turning to ice. The two men each tie one end of a rope around their waists, just in case someone falls. Good thing, too. Roy takes a tumble and is stopped only by the rope and the fact that Paladin is able to steady himself and pull Roy to safety. Act 2. The two men continue their uphill climb as the sun starts getting low until Roy collapses in the snow. He urges Paladin to just leave him here, But Paladin's not having it. In fact, he now wants Roy to lead the way so he can keep an eye on him. They keep walking until they spot someone unconscious in the snow. It's Robert April, still alive, but without a jacket. Paladin says that his jacket must have been removed very recently, or the chaplain wouldn't still be alive. They bundle April in a blanket and start trying to rub some warmth back into his extremities. To rile April into waking up, Paladin tells him that all of his sermons were lies. Well, that wakes April up, just barely. Paladin sends Roy to get some wood to build both a fire and a sled so they can take April home. But April is still worried about his escapee. He's still loose, and he's still armed. Paladin yells to Roy to come back, with a warning about the armed convict. Roy breaks into a run, and a shot rings out. Roy spins and falls into the snow, hit by a bullet. Paladin breaks cover to haul Roy back to safety, narrowly avoiding being hit himself. Now he has one weak man almost frozen to death, and another with a bullet wound to worry about. Paladin puts together the best shelter he can so they can survive the nighttime cold. Despite it all, April still feels responsibility toward the escapee, and even suggests inviting the man in from the cold to share their shelter. While April insists that there's a reason for all of this to be happening, Paladin can only ruminate on the senselessness of it all. He can't guarantee that Roy or April will make it, or even that the escaped convict will survive, and why should he want to, if it's more likely than not that he'll end up back in jail for the rest of his life? Act 3. Morning. In the bone-chilling cold, Paladin is helping April and Roy get seated on a makeshift sled so he can try to get them safely down the mountain, when another man frantically approaches. "Oh, hi. Not to make this too awkward, but aren't you the escapee who was shooting us yesterday?" Paladin draws his gun, but April grabs his arm. The man is asking for help. In fact, he's begging to return to his warm cell. April offers the man his seat on the sled and offers to help Paladin pull the sled. Swayed by April's unending compassion, Paladin puts his gun away and the journey down the mountain begins. But April is barely able to make good on helping to pull the sled. He repeatedly falls to his knees despite his protests that he's feeling stronger with every mile. Finally, they know they're getting close to home. Roy and Paladin's horses wait faithfully where they were left. April sits by a tree to rest, but Roy cries out. Paladin draws his gun and whirls around to see Roy and the escapee struggling over a knife. Paladin orders the man off the sled, and the escapee admits that he was neither injured nor freezing. He runs, but only gets as far as the tree where Chaplain Robert April was sitting, but is now laying on the ground, dead. Paladin gives the convict back his knife and orders him to dig a grave for April. No, better yet, dig one big enough for 2 bodies. That task done, the man keeps trying to buy himself more time, suggesting that someone read a verse of the Bible for April before he is buried. Paladin grabs April's Bible and settles on the book of Luke. "I say unto you which hear, love your enemies. Do good to them which hate you." As Paladin keeps reading, and even as Roy holds Paladin's gun on the man, the escapee runs again over the ridge. As Paladin keeps reading, "Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven," Roy admits that he couldn't pull the trigger. Paladin doesn't blame Roy. He's more concerned with properly laying April to rest than with adding a second body to the grave. In this harsh environment, whether it's at the hands of a posse or the elements, some judgment awaits the man who killed Robert April. The end.
Earl, excellent recap as always. Why don't you come in from the cold after that one? As we're recording this towards the end of July, it was kind of nice. Like, snow,
Yeah, that's what that's like.
Yeah. I say, we, in my neck of the woods, we haven't seen any measurable snow in 2 years, which is sad for me as a lover of snow.
Where I am, because it's kind of a high altitude area, we get more ice than snow up here.
Yeah.
That's not even fun.
Nope.
You know, if I'm going to break my neck trying to go down to the bottom of the driveway and get my mail, that's not a winter wonderland. That's just death from below. Our episode of Have Gun Will Travel with the new faces of Roy Carter and Robert April. Yeah, I understand the production realities because I just explained those at perhaps too much great length. I understand what happened there and why they were recast. The original actors were probably booked on something else. The portrayal of Roy Carter is so very different here that it actually took me out of things just a little bit. Did the recasting register with you at all?
Nope, because I have learned hosting trivia that I am face blind. It takes me, with my trivia attendees, takes me 3 to 5 weeks to line up faces and names.
You'll never cut it on Team Con, because Con never forgets a face.
No, could never be on Team Con.
Team Con's got good music, though. I mean, lots of earworms there.
That's true.
Anyway.
Gross.
I was surprised by how much of this episode was spent on basically a travelogue of the climb.
Yeah.
Now, I get it. They lucked out on the location. And by the way, if anyone is wondering where this was filmed, this episode and a previous episode, but they were not aired together. The previous episode was not written by Gene. It was called The Long Hunt. They were filmed back-to-back in Yokuts Valley in Fresno County. So this was a further location shoot than the usual warmth of the filming ranches in and around L.A. But I'm assuming that they hit this mountainous area, mildly mountainous area, because it's really the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. Or Sierra Nevadas, because people are going to keep me honest on that. It's not as mountainous, maybe, as they were playing it up to be, but, okay, so we've got a neat location. We've got the weather conditions. Yes, get all of that on film. I was just surprised by how much of the 26-minute running time we gave over to 2 guys trudging through the snow while music is playing.
Yeah. I'm looking at this like, why don't I have a ton of notes about this? It's because they were all just hiking up a mountain the whole time.
Yeah. It was an interesting choice. We have Andy McLaughlin directing again, and he did milk that combination of location and weather conditions for maximum impact, but still, there was a long time with no dialogue, and so my notes are also correspondingly kind of small, and I may have overcompensated with the trivia this week. In the tent, I don't know, it's not really a tent, it's a shelter. It's just kind of a lean-to shelter that Paladin manages to construct. Robert April is lying there, and he says, "When I was a boy in Iowa." Okay, so Iowa is the birthplace of Robert April and James T. Kirk.
Definitely crossed my mind.
Now, Ashley, if that factoid does not get us a speaking engagement at the next Riverside Trek Fest in Riverside, Iowa, I don't know what will. We're right here.
Come on.
Yeah, how cool would that be? Gene-ology live.
Hey, dude, I am here for it. Please and thank you. Let's go.
Now, I have a theory here that Macbeth may be Gene's favorite piece of Shakespeare, because this is the second reference to the Scottish play that we have gotten in a Gene script in the second season of Have Gun Will Travel. Because we were talking about it, strangely, because there was no specific piece of dialogue tying it to that, we were talking about Macbeth in relation to the witch in the Monster of Moon Ridge, if you recall. And so we have this statistically outsized bump of Macbeth references from Gene this season. Have you got anything else funny? Because that's really my last funny note, because this is kind of a dark, stark ending for Have Gun Will Travel. I don't have a lot of funnies here.
I think, kind of a general observation about Gene's writing in this second season is every single one of his episodes were either The Women or Roy Carter. So that's the extent of my funny observations. I have to wonder, and this is probably more of a discussion point, how did Roy Carter go from the kid that we see at the end of The Hanging of Roy Carter, who tells off his dad and goes to do his own thing, to the man that we see at the beginning of this episode, who is much more like his dad? and enjoying the luxuries of wealth versus doing the right thing for the man that saved your life.
Yeah, I have some questions about that in the discussion, but yeah, this seems more like he's been running a college bookstore than helping Robert April with a prison library. Because he's got some coins to rub together, apparently enough to impress the ladies. And he does not wish to stop impressing the ladies, even when Robert April's life in danger. Instead, he's going to send a note to Paladin, who is days away, presumably, saying, "Oh, hey, little help here?" Instead of doing anything himself.
I don't know if you know this about me, Earl. Back in, early 2010s, I managed 3 college bookstores. Let me tell you, the people who are managing the college bookstores are not the ones making the money. It's whoever is up top who's making the money.
Oh, so it's like Roy Carter owns a college bookstore.
Yes.
Instead of a prison
and Robert
library.
April is the manager.
Yeah,
Yep.
I can't figure out where the money came from. Of course, maybe Roy reconnected with his dad. I mean, it is pointed out that the script puts the line in somebody's mouth that the hanging of Roy Carter was last year. Which, in terms of air date, yes, it was. It was maybe more like 6-8 months ago. There may have been time for Roy and his dad to reconnect, hash some stuff out, and, okay, kid, you're not so bad. Here is a large truckload of money to make it up to you. Like bad parenting, which, let's face it, that is a thing that happens even now.
Yep.
It doesn't really make up for it.
No.
But the difference in how Roy is played here, and not just in terms of the change in actor, but how the script treats him, is very different. The only thing I could really figure is that we didn't learn a huge amount about Roy in his first appearance, and so he is conveniently, mostly a blank slate. So if Gene needs him to be an ungrateful brat in this episode, then an ungrateful brat he is.
I think that's fair.
But it does seem like a large pivot.
Yeah.
One area where I did find that maybe there was some connecting tissue in the character of Roy Carter is that he can't shoot the escapee in the back as he's running off. And he admits he couldn't shoot him. He couldn't pull the trigger. So could it be that Roy has learned a little something about mercy? Or am I giving him too much credit?
I don't think you're giving him too much credit. I do think sometimes people don't learn to act right until the people in their lives that did act right are gone. And they realize, I gotta change what I'm doing. I gotta change my ways.
I did get a chuckle about that very unmanly yelp that Roy lets out when he is slipping down the mountain. That's a very gentle slope.
Yeah.
No filming angle, we didn't do any Dutch angles to make that look like it was a bigger drop than it was. It's a very gentle slope. Now, Paladin does say that the snow is icing over. So, okay, I get it. Maybe he's on the slip and slide that he doesn't want to be on. And that explains a great deal. It just kind of took me back to the Doctor Who 20th anniversary special, The 5 Doctors, where Sarah Jane appears and Elizabeth Sladen really sells that she's about to plummet to her death when she is doing her best to push herself down this very, very gentle incline. But boy, the performance just really sells it. And so, good going, Clu Gallagher. That's why they paid you that paycheck for that week. All right, Ashley and everyone, welcome to the Gene-ology Literary Society. So much stuff was quoted in this episode. We have Bible passages, we have scenes from Shakespeare, and all of them quoted in relation to the story are these actually the messages of the story, or are they seasoning? What do you think?
I was thinking about this episode. I feel like, kind of like in The Hanging of Roy Carter, you have this interesting discussion of justice and mercy. I think we get another similar yet different discussion about those same topics in this episode, because you have someone who has been shown mercy and has been delivered justice because he believed him to be innocent and fought for him to prove his innocence. And so in the previous Roy Carter episode, Robert April has delivered justice and shown mercy. In this Roy Carter episode, you have Roy Carter, who is the recipient of that justice and mercy, unwilling to take action to be an agent of justice and mercy. And I think that's fascinating. I think it's bringing to mind the parable that Jesus told in the New Testament about the man who had a great debt, and the person he owed the debt to took pity on him, showed him mercy, and forgave the debt. Well, this person who had been shown the mercy instead tried to go shake down somebody who owed him a very little. And when that guy found out about it, he's like, I showed you mercy and you have shown this guy none. I'm going to throw you in jail until you can pay the full amount. It's this idea of, you have been shown a great mercy. You were about to go to the gallows. You were on the chopping block. And now you are not acting like, hey, you were once on the chopping block. And, and the guy who saved you is out there risking his life to show mercy to somebody else, and you are taking no action. What is wrong with you?
I thought it was a really interesting writing choice to go from Roy Carter as the puppy we don't want anyone to kick, literally weeping and crying out for mercy. And in this one, he's unlikable.
Yeah.
Even climbing up the hill, he's just like, oh, this is hopeless. And then falling over on that very gentle slope. Oh, Paladin, just leave me. And I almost expected Paladin to leave it. I'm going to be honest. Yeah. If this had been modern TV, I think Paladin would have said, okay, bye. Good luck with that. Yeah. It's a really interesting choice.
For sure. And I have to wonder, is this for want of better terminology, is this a type of judgment call from Gene on those who, I mean, his father owned the majority of the cattle in Texas. Roy's obviously gotten some of that wealth from his father. And yes, he's doing the philanthropic thing of, helping start the library and basically funding Robert April's mission of mercy. But at the same time is still exceedingly wealthy and unwilling to leave the comfort of his home and company of a pretty lady to go do the right thing, to go after Robert April.
Yeah, it's like I said previously in kind of our more lighthearted observations, it's a heck of a character pivot. And yet,
yeah,
we all do kind of do that sometimes, don't we? We get kind of entrenched in our day-to-day lives, and it becomes easy to perhaps forget some of the niceties and the things we should be showing gratitude for. And I can think of times that I have been guilty of doing the same thing, like not always keeping every life lesson I have learned in mind.
Oh, yeah. And nobody is able to do that 100% correct all of the time. But it seems like to have had such a close brush with death, I feel like that would have changed him more. You would think that anyway.
Yeah, and especially if we are dealing with him at a point only months after, not years after, but months after that happened. You would think that he would be out there campaigning against the death penalty or something like that.
Yeah.
If anyone could actually get away with doing that in that time frame, that historical time frame. Now, the passage from Luke that is quoted as the escapee escapes once more ends in these words, at least from the NIV: "Do to others as you would have them do to you." Of course, this is also more commonly rendered as "do unto others as you would have them do unto you." And whatever the specific language, most people refer to this as the golden rule. How does that really apply with, as far as letting this guy go when he runs away? Because chances are he's not going to last long out there. Is that mercy?
It's at least giving him a shot at life. Not, we're just executing you right here.
Yeah, but at the same time, it seems to be implied that there's really only one way down this mountain, and that's the way we came up. He's not going to have food up there. He's not going to have shelter up there. He's going to have to come down. And sooner or later, he is going to run into someone who will execute him on the spot. He can't show his face to civilized society again. And so that was one thought that just kind of stuck with me is this mercy, or are we leaving him to die? Or are we, wiping our hands of it and say, you know what happens, happens?
It's almost like Paladin, who is quite often the person who is executing justice. He is leaving that sentencing, in the hands of God, effectively.
Yeah, and that was kind of in my notes as well. That various people will attribute it to, he's leaving it to God, he's leaving it to nature, he's leaving it to fate. It's just really fascinating that he's sitting out this round, because for this show's purposes, Paladin is justice incarnate. There are instances where we have seen Paladin break the law, the letter of the law, but he is still on the side of justice. And here, he's just kind of noping his way out of the conversation. He's, this is not for me to rule on. That's a fascinating turn for this show to take, when our character, who is, he's walking justice, basically. But he is the deliverer of justice, and he's not making that delivery this week.
It's almost like he is letting the man go out of respect for what Robert April would have done.
Okay, I hadn't considered that.
That is how I'm choosing to read it, especially based on the scripture passages that he chose to read. Do unto others, judge not, lest you be judged. And, so those are all passages about showing mercy.
Right.
And and which was, Robert April was the embodiment of that in this series. So I can see Paladin, who, this is the one big quote I wrote down. Robert April's a man that never did one thing for me, and probably never can. Right now he's depriving me of bed, board, and comfort. There's no reason for any of this, no reason for April to be up, and certainly no reason for you and me to be up here after him, except that I respect him more than any man I ever met. Paladin's mad as hell about having to be up here doing his thing in these conditions, but he's only doing it because he respects Robert April so much. And so I could see him, instead of executing the man who was ultimately the cause of Robert April's demise, showing that man mercy, because that's what Robert would have done.
Yeah, okay, I can get that. By the way, did Paladin seem a little surlier than usual this week?
Oh, he was hella cranky.
Okay.
I don't blame him.
Little trivia note. Richard Boone got a splinter in his foot while shooting on location.
Oh no.
But they were out there shooting 2 episodes back-to-back because they had this fantastic location and these fantastic weather conditions, and he just had to roll with it. And so, I don't think he's even acting there. That was just the mood Richard Boone was in. Full stop.
And I can't blame him. Splinters, teeny tiny things, and they hurt like hell.
Yeah.
Nobody likes that.
So yeah, just an interesting trivia note there that I read when I was researching. If Paladin seems a bit less polite than usual, a bit less wordy, a bit less flowery, Richard Boone was in some serious discomfort there, and just had to keep shooting.
Well, and you know what? It works great for this story and the situation he finds himself in. So, yeah. I'd
take that, method actors.
I'll show you. I'll get a real splinter, and then we'll see how cranky I can be.
Exactly. Now, Paladin spends about as much time quoting Shakespeare alongside the Bible here, which is an interesting choice. We have a long-running... I don't even want to say it's a joke on Mission Log that if you wonder where an episode title came from, check Shakespeare or check the Bible. Because there is a statistically outsized chance that it is from one of those 2 places. So we get quite a reading from the Book of Luke, but I felt like the Scottish play got short shrift here. And so I wanted to give some context of this part that Paladin keeps quoting throughout the episode. This is from Act 5, Scene 5 of Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I have always taken that scene, that soliloquy, to mean no matter how much noise you might make in life, how much of a big deal we might be on a small scale or a large scale, there are big fish in small ponds. Whether you've done good, whether you've done bad, death silences everyone equally. It's the one skill we all share is keeling over and not breathing anymore. So whether it's a good man like Robert April or, the real piece of work who literally got a free ride down the mountain out of some of April's last breaths, this all has Paladin questioning what it all means. And, sorry, Luke, Paladin has no love for this particular enemy. He seems to be acknowledging that the course that this man has chosen will bring the Great Leveler down upon him sooner rather than later, and that may in itself be some form of justice. Also, bonus points, everyone, if you heard multiple Star Trek episode titles just in that one quoted passage of Shakespeare.
Strange New Worlds is continuing the proud tradition of naming episodes after Shakespeare.
Yeah, I mean, there were at least 2 episode titles just in that little section. Now, what
was the other one?
All Our Yesterdays, next to last episode of the original series.
Yep. Oh, good catch. I missed that. Kept thinking about, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, like Season 2, Episode 3 of Strange New Worlds. Yes, please.
Also an episode of The Orville.
Is it?
I think it's the Season 2 finale. We have a lot of literary quotes coming out of people's mouths. Are these necessarily the messages of this episode?
I feel like there's some tension between... I feel like Paladin, on one hand, is very much that Shakespeare quote from Macbeth. He's like, what is the point of this? What is the point of this? What is the point of this? As an idiot, signaling sound and fury, with sound and fury signifying nothing. It's kind of like this, almost like nihilistic view of life. Because he has a splinter and he's very cold.
Yeah, but he's just, it's the futility of it all.
Yes,
getting to him.
He's like, this is pointless. This is horrible. Like, this doesn't make sense. Versus Robert April, who is driven by mercy and wanting to show mercy to someone who obviously is not showing any mercy to him. And so I feel like the theme of the episode is the conflict between these two, and how Paladin, because he respects Robert April so much, is willing to go through this futility because it's the right thing to do.
All right, Ashley, we have climbed the mountain. I don't know if we've made it to the top, but we have gotten to the conclusion of Gene's final entry for the second season of Have Gun Will Travel. We've got Bible passages and Shakespeare quotes here. Whether it's Luke's message of forgiveness or Macbeth's meditation on futility, these quotes all feel a bit like window dressing, like maybe it's the cumulative total that we're supposed to be paying attention to for the message, and not necessarily either one of them by itself. Hey, did you get the impression that maybe Gene is making a determined pitch for the existence of natural justice here?
Could be. I was focusing more on that tension of feeling like this is futile, but, sorry, Borg, resistance is not always futile. I think there is a quote from Gene, like, it's, we may never get here, but the exercise is the point.
Right.
I forget what the exact quote is, but that's basically like, it is not futile to try to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't yield the results that we want.
Yeah, you don't learn from the destination, you learn from making the effort and making the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The reason this occurred to me is that we're given clues early in the episode, and I said this previous segment, there's really one survivable way up or down that mountain. There's not much food up there, there's even less shelter. Our guy who just ran back up that mountain and away from justice, time is not on his side. His story is going to play out probably sooner rather than later. Probably not in his favor. I don't think this guy has a happily ever after. Whether justice is brought upon him by another human being or just by the elements. He doesn't have long. And he knows that, but he is so scared to ask for any kind of real forgiveness. And perhaps he's incapable of it. It struck me that he is just wired in a way that he is going to try to work the angles as much as he can until he runs out of angles to work. And then he's done. This was all just a really fascinating exercise because this is an era of American TV where the stories that unfolded every week were supposed to show us that the good guys always got their man in the end. This is a story that doesn't really resolve. And a lot of our discussion has been questions and not answers. And for this era of TV, that really sticks out as a bold storytelling choice.
I hadn't quite thought about it within the historical context, but you're exactly right. Like, for, I guess, a more modern audience, this is like Walker, Texas Rangers, like the bad guy got away. And that never happened at any episode of Walker, Texas Ranger.
Yeah, it's a no good option story. And we're so accustomed to those now, to the point that it's almost wearying, in the 2020s to have a story where there's no good options. Maybe there weren't actually no heroes. For the 50s, this really stands out as a kind of a brave choice.
Absolutely.
Leave it to Gene to take a really big swing with this last script for this season. I wonder how hard it was for him to... Because every script you hand in Hollywood, it's kind of like the doctoral dissertation all over again. You've got to defend it. to everyone in the room. And you have to advocate for your story. And in some cases, sit there and watch helplessly while it is changed to better suit the format or what have you. I wonder how much Gene had to fight to give us a story where there is no real resolution. We don't see the bad guy get what we would normally be told in any other episode of this show are his just desserts. Now, speaking of dessert, he may wind up being a snow cone in short order, but no other just desserts seem to be forthcoming for the audience to see. I just thought that was really interesting.
Earl, I don't think I can say it any better than that, other than the guy might also end up being a blizzard.
Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you would like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com.
On the next episode of Gene-ology, episode in Laredo.
Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David DeCacci.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.